All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Jeremy Molnar. I'm the SVP of Client Success and Solution Development for Synergistek. Today, we're going to go over the Moving Forward, Setting the Direction presentation, which Dave is going to run through all the details from the 2020 annual report that you all received this morning. So hopefully, everyone's had a chance to read that this morning. We've given you a lot of time. I want to go over a couple housekeeping items. Just remember, you have the communication panel on the right, in which you can ask us questions via the chat or the Q&A tab. Definitely ask us questions. I'll make sure and address any of those with Dave at the end. Also, at the end of the session, please make sure and take the time to answer the poll question. Dave's ability to have lunch today is dependent on you all answering good questions. So definitely spend the time there. I'm gonna hand it over to Dave. He is our Director of Security Services. For those that listen to our podcast, he's the one half of the Statler and Waldorf duo from one of those podcasts. So I'll let him take over. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Once again, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Dave Bailey, Director of Security Services, and I'm really happy that I could be here today. I felt a little bit of pressure before this presentation, and mostly that pressure was the fact that I didn't bring a puppy to the presentation. So I don't have any pets to share, and I know that put a lot of pressure on because it's actually really hard to follow cute puppies when you do presentations. So I'm just going to have to stick to the final report. I'm real happy today to bring you these results. I really am honored that I can sit down, with this group and talk about, where the industry is, what our trends are, key takeaways, and what really does the data mean. So with that said, a couple things that I want to talk about the annual report. While these bullets on this screen may not sound the best, because ultimately what it came down to is when you look at the numbers, the industry as a whole. Now, once again, we're going to talk about the industry as a whole. There was not a lot of maturity improvement. The scores showed that for the most part, in many areas, the industry was flat, if not falling behind. And why is that the case? Well, it definitely showed that, if you weren't making a very direct, concerted, and approved effort within your organizations and to improve, it wasn't even the fact that you were standing still. It was the fact you were falling behind. So we did see that. Another theme that we pulled out is I think we're starting a little bit of an imbalance with a focus on the maturity score versus reducing risk. While the score is extremely important as we look at how we grade someone or how we evaluate someone's controls within an organization, ultimately the process is around reducing risk, and we hope that this data can provide very good insight to where your programs are, where your risks may be, and how you can build those plans of action moving forward. The other thing I want to point out about the annual report is that this is our third year of full assessments using the NIST CSF. What I mean by that is, we pretty much started the year in 2019 being the third year where over 90% of all of our assessments that we did within the industry were using the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So with that said, we did have an opportunity, now that we had 3 years worth of data, to do a quality, data quality exercise on what we had. And, I think just like, most folks that go through maturing processes, and, we took a look at the data. We did have to make some adjustments. We did have to look at, timing of things, and we've really taken a leap forward in our ability to, not only store that data, but to mine it and to be able to bring you the insights that the data can give. And when you look at the 2020 annual report, it'll describe some of those adjustments, and you'll be able to see, how that impacted some of the scores of the past. Okay, so what do we assess? Just a very, very quick overview of this. As I stated before, we started a formal transition to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework back in the start of 2017. And really what we realized, and I think what the industry, realized as a whole, and not just the healthcare industry, is that, if you only look at HIPAA and you take a HIPAA sole focused view of your security program, it really turned out to be more of a compliance look than it did, am I doing the right things to safeguard my people, data systems, assets, and capabilities? So, the NIST framework is a much broader, recognized framework that other industries have formally adopted. And, we found great success now that we're in our, basically 3 complete years of conducting this, for our clients. There was a change between 2018 and 2019. One of the changes that occurred was that the NIST CSF framework moved from the 1.0 version of the framework to the 1.1. And really what that means is, there was a major change. One of the major changes was it added an entire control area. The 1.0 control areas were it was 22 control areas, and they added the supply chain management control, which now is 23 control areas. The other area that had a major impact was the access control component of Protect. So, we saw a greater emphasis on how we were to evaluate, identity management, access control, to include people and network devices and things. So, with that said, the 1.1 version, covers 23 control areas and 108 subcategories. I really like the framework. I think it's a framework that, once you get out of the ones and zeros, when you deal with security and IT folks, that it's an easy framework to be able to communicate, how well do you identify the risks that are associated to your people, your folks, your assets, your business. How well do you protect that data? How well can you detect, cybersecurity events from happening? And then, heaven forbid, if they did happen, how well do you respond? And, and if you were impacted by a cybersecurity event, can you recover? Not only can you recover the data, but can you recover the services that are required to run your business? So, I think the framework is an excellent framework, to be able to use, certainly in the healthcare industry. All right. So, how do we measure? We measure the progress of an assessment using the COBIT maturity model. It's a scale 0 to 5 in range, and really what I want everyone to focus on is, most organizations are ranging in the 1s, 2s, and 3s when it comes to process maturity. What does that mean? 1 is a process development, 2 is process standardization, 3 is process formalization. We generally don't see a lot of organizations that are investing and are capable at this stage of really taking an entire security program into process validation or process optimization. It doesn't mean that they can't be good targets, good goals. What you have to be doing, what generally we see, is that because where everyone is in the industry, the ultimate goal right now is, the industry needs to be at that process formalization. What does that mean? Well, it means that you have a process, you're doing it, it's effective, and it's formal. And the formal side sometimes is a challenge, because formalization usually means governed by policy and process, documented procedures, and also trained. One of the ways we like to explain what process formalization means is that if I left the organization today, would Jeremy be able to come into my job and have enough information for him to be able to perform that job? And if the answer to that question is yes, and you have all that documentation, and you do the training, and it's beyond just one person, doing an activity in an informal manner, that's really where the process formalization lies. So the great thing about using the maturity model is, it is a standard way we assess every organization using the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. It does not matter the size, does not matter the industry, the organization type. It really is every organization we evaluate, based upon our assessment and provide the results. So with that said, and really what my goal today is, I want to be able to provide, to you what those industry trends are and how to interpret what you're going to read in the 2020 annual report, as well as I've got some information in here that I think really can help describe, why. I think we can all see what the results are, but this presentation hopefully will be able to help understand the why. So with that said, I've got a few logistics items that I want to point out. What you'll see in this year's 2020 annual report is, there's a couple charts here. They're pretty consistent within the document themselves. There is a color scheme. What we're focusing on generally when we look at our industry breakouts is what you're going to see in 2019, which is that lighter blue color. Now we've added the total line. So now that we have 3 years worth of data, we are adding a trend line to whatever data we can present to you over a 3-year period. So what you're going to see in the report is that color consistency, as well as where it's applicable. We're going to show you a 3-year trend. The percentages. So just a clarification, so everyone is aware of what does the percentage mean. So on the NIST conformance, as this example, as we step through, 44% was the overall industry grading scale when it came to the overall NIST conformance. What does that mean? We evaluated 23 control areas. We look at what percentage of those controls did we evaluate at that 3 or better. So the 3 is the mark for conformance. Once again, that means you have a process, you're doing it, it's effective, and it's formalized. So for 2019, 44% of the organizations that were assessed, the organization scored for everyone that was assessed, the average score was a 44%. And that was down 3 percentage points from 2018, with an overall trend, from 2017, about flat. And now, if you look at this data at the highest level, it's really hard to, I think, to get it. Data tells a story, right? You can look at the data and you can say, what does that mean? I think overall it means that the industry really isn't improving by any stretch of the imagination. Now, what I want to show to you in this data is, there are reasons for that, and there's some really good successes, and there's some reasons why that, we truly believe the industry is where it is. So now on the other side, on the HIPAA side, our NIST evaluation allows us to provide to you your conformance against HIPAA security rule. And, as we communicate to you, we are changing some of our taxonomy a little bit. As I like to say, this is really more a HIPAA readiness, audit readiness score is probably the best way to say it. And once again, the percentages mean that we evaluate the 45 applicable security rule implementation specifications, and we determine whether we feel you're in conformance with that spec. And overall in 2019, 77 organizations scored were 76% of those implementation specifications we felt were conforming. What does that mean? That it means that you're not quite ready for what we would be a HIPAA audit. And the, the way we evaluate HIPAA is, we look at, do you have the, the policies and procedures? We keep that OCR audit protocol in mind as far as what would an assessor, and an OCR auditor look at. And really, since we're not conducting an actual audit as part of our assessment process, we're giving you an indicator of where you feel, are you ready for that audit? So, and once again, what does the data show? It does show some improvement. There's a slight statistical improvement from 2018 to 2019. I would still say that that overall it's not enough to say the needle is really being moved. All right, so now I want to get into some of the, I want to peel the onion back a few layers, as they say, and I really want to get into some data that I think is very insightful, and hopefully you find it to be insightful. So if you look at all of the risk assessments that were performed by Synergistic that makes up this data set for 2019, what you see on the table on the right-hand side is a 10% percentage breakout of what the overall percentages are. So what that basically means is, to read the table is 9% of the assessments scored within the 90 to 100% conformance in the NIST CSF, 7%, 80 to 89. Now, when you look at that, as you can see, there's a fair amount in each of those breakouts. It was quite interesting to know that if the industry average for 2019 was 44%, 50% of the assessments fell below that average and 50% fell above it. What I think is quite interesting, 20% of the assessments that we did had organizations that, did not yet have mature programs. They fell within that 0 to 9%. So, still tremendous opportunities. So what I want to do is also break down, just so everyone kind of gets an understanding of how they can best interpret the data. So out of all of the RAs that were performed, you had 50 above, 50 below. 58% of all the RAs that we performed, it was part of a multi-year assessment. So, which meant that we did an assessment in 2019. We had also done an assessment in 2018, and we had the ability to look at year-over-year improvement. Now, if you then break out that 58%, 60% of those that fell into that category showed program improvement. 9% were flat, showed no improvement, and 31% had downgrades. So the remaining number, which was 42% of the assessments that we performed, they were first-time NIST CSF assessments. So we had no other data points. So what I want to do over the next 3 charts is I want to break out the improvement side of a multi-year assessment. And the reason I want to do this is I really want to show organizations that, what is the industry like? What are others doing? And B, can it be done? And one of the things that is really, I just want to get my laser pointer here. There's a lot of great things that this chart tells me. One of the great things that it says here is that the blue line represents the 2018 assessment. The green line represents the 2019 assessment. And what you see here is there were organizations that made significant improvements when they went year over year. Those organizations, as you can see, sometimes folks ask, how far can you go? We had some organizations that made significant jumps from down within the teens up well into, this is in the 80s, this is in the 70s. So, and then even organizations here over a 1-year improvement, over 1 year showed really good improvement. What this chart also shows is there was pretty much a consistent theme, with the exception of a few others, with folks that were above the average. There was very consistent and modest modest improvements over 1 year. So I thought that the data when we finally looked at that was very telling. It really shows where folks were not only above the average, but below. It was very encouraging to note that folks that made that kind of leap from in improvement year over year, we did an assessment of them, and the assessment results were not that good, and they made significant improvement and investment in it. So it was very, very good to see that certainly not only can our assessment process help, but our partnership with you can make that improvement. All right. What I also want to show is what can it look like over 3 years. So this particular chart is a start to finish over a 3-year span. And now, once again, this particular subset of data that we're showing here is organizations that made improvement that had 3 years worth of, or at least 3 years worth of NIST CSF assessments. So the blue line is the start once again, and the green line is the finish. And with the exception of a few, what you really see is, having a consistent assessment, having a partner, working through a process, making the commitments to be able to improve your programs. You can see that there's significant improvement that can occur. So, while the industry overall has some very flat data, I think this data is very telling. To be able to help, talk and communicate to your leadership and demonstrate that yes, others can, and shows that progress can be made over a journey of security. All right, now the slide. I don't like talking about downgrades, but it is the reality. And what this slide demonstrates is a 1-year downgrade process. Now, when I ran the data and I looked at this particular chart, I really sat back for a minute and I said, okay, what is this telling me? And what were the reasons? And I think there's probably a lot of questions out there. I know internally at CTEK, we always, take these very seriously, and we have lots of discussions about this particular process. But there were some themes that really struck here, from downgrades. And one of the themes that I want to point out is while security programs, are always attempting to improve, there are lots of changes that are going on in business and industry right now. A lot of the downgrades, there was consistent themes where their business models were changing. They had acquisitions and mergers. They weren't the same from the year before. They now were bringing in new partners, new business models, new affiliates, new hospitals. So when those things occur, a lot of times overall, when you assess an organization from an enterprise, sometimes mature processes have to take a step backwards, or they have to take time to adjust to the new business environment. So we did see a lot of that in downgrades. The other thing that we saw that was a consistent theme in downgrades was, potentially a major change in technology. So while, and as I like to say, it's kind of in both directions, maybe the good way or the bad way. And the good way is, you recognize you have a gap, you make an investment, you buy a piece of technology, but just because you have the technology does not mean now that your process is mature and effective. So, some of the downgrades is just the fact that as organizations are growing and maturing, and they're implementing new technology, that the timing of the assessment says that, hey, that process that maybe was mature last year, now you're doing it with a different tool or a different process, and that process has not yet fully matured for its effectiveness. Doesn't mean it won't be, and it doesn't mean you won't launch forward again, but those are some common themes. Now, every single one of these dots on this chart has a story to tell. But what I wanted to do was at least to be able to say, these were some common themes that we saw. The other thing that I will say is that too, you had organizations that did have downgrades that were, had very, very mature programs. And it is, I don't want to tell folks that a downgrade means you're doing something wrong or it's, I know it's hard to explain to boards and leaderships, but it is the reality of security. Once again, you have to be able to stay on top of the security program as it moves and migrates with the business. And sometimes those two things just are not at the same level. And I think everybody that's been in the security field knows that you would love to have enough time to assess and do things, but a lot of times business just doesn't dictate that. I can speak from true experience being a former HIPAA security officer that, sometimes you find out about things when it's already on the loading dock or the contract's already signed. So, these are things that we just have to deal with. It's the reality of life. So I'm going to jump ahead here real quick. And now I'm going to dive into the meat of the data. All right. So here, what I want to do is talk about the identify. As you'll see here, and as you can look in the annual report, you'll see these charts. I wanted to provide some context of why the scores were there. A lot of the scores here are reflected because we had the addition of supply chain, and not only is supply chain now have a complete focus on, it is looking at how well an organization is evaluating the vendors that are providing their services, as well as, requiring things like, are you asking for vulnerability scans? Are you asking for evidence that, the certain criteria is being met? Almost 100% of the clients that we assessed in 2019, and even as today that we are assessing, almost 100% of those clients have to operate and maintain systems that are end of life, that's unsupported or unmanaged. So we still see a huge problem because, just the ability to be able to manage not only unmanaged assets by IT, but the fact that, and no joke, I'm not lying, I saw an organization within the last 12 months that still had a Windows NT 4.0 box. So it's still a reality. And I know every CIO and every security officer does not want to have that happen, but it is the reality of healthcare. All right, on the detect side, a couple common themes. Multi-factor authentication for all remote access, still an issue. It's becoming the standard. You have to have it. Phishing is such a big threat and an attack vector. You need to have 2FA on remote access, and we only see a small number of organizations that are using multi-factor beyond remote access. So, some are starting to implement it within administrator or privileged access, but it's not there yet. Probably the number one thing in the protect tenet is network access control and network segmentation. The industry as a whole, while we see some fantastic organizations that have great segmentation, these are definitely the exception, and it's not the rule. Most networks are flat. Most networks, they've got a guest network segmented. They've got an internal network, but basically they do not deploy the appropriate level of network segmentation, in order to segment, sensitive traffic. And it's something that most folks want to do, but understand that it does take a very, very long time to implement NAC. While folks are getting better at data encryption, and what we're seeing is most folks do have laptop and workstation encryption, they're not getting better when it comes to USB drives. We still see organizations that don't have technical controls in place to manage USB drives, that have policies that allow not the appropriate safeguards for BYOD, that still allow access to personal email. As I like to say, one of the best terms I heard in the last 12 months was, everyone talks about bring your own device. I heard bring your own cloud. And I really like that because, too many opportunities to lose control of information with the access to all of the personal cloud environments. So that's kind of the common themes around the protect area. On the detect side, most organizations, they have something in place to identify cybersecurity events. The areas that we see that have the best scores in this, they have a hybrid model where they're using a SOC, they're using internal teams, and they have a SIM. However, we see too many organizations that don't have SIMs. They don't have the ability to correlate all the events. If they do have a SIM, they're not connecting all of their security technologies to get a full picture of what their environment is. The other thing that we're seeing in this area is, most organizations that do try to take on the use of a SIM, internally, generally do not have enough manpower to be able to, run that program effectively. Doesn't mean they're not smart. Doesn't mean they can't do it. It just means that the manpower doesn't match, to what is required in certainly in today's environment. So, once again, not all folks have this implemented. Some, however, are doing it very well. And once again, I always like to point out, the folks that are doing it well, they have a SOC, they have some level of third-party monitoring and some hybrid approach with their internal security teams. On the response side, still too many organizations that do not have formalized incident response plans. Or if they have them, one of my favorite responses is, I'm really lucky that we haven't had to use it yet. If someone says that they haven't had to use their security plan, their incident response plan, it's usually the biggest red flag, because there's too many areas where, this is a plan that usually needs to be run, executed, day after day, refined. And as we like to tell folks, you need to have a playbook that addresses ransomware. You need to have a playbook that addresses phishing, lost and stolen devices, and certainly malware. Most folks are getting first response correct, generally speaking, but ultimately are not exercising their incident response plans with their entire organization. So we still see that as a problem. And lastly, on the recover side, most folks have really good recovery capabilities when it comes to their EMRs. Generally speaking, what we see here is that, while the industry is a little bit better in the recovery side, as you look at all the functions, it still hasn't caught up to what's going on in technology, as well as, are you exercising actually full system restores? Most folks are relying upon their failover, but they're not testing their failover. So those are some common themes that that we're seeing in the recover side. And then one of the last things I want to get to before key takeaways is that, we do have the ability to break out the data, and what you'll see in the annual report is the ability to look at the data by number of beds, if that's applicable, if you're a hospital or a health system, by overall revenue count, by employee number, by organization type, because we have some business associates, assisted living programs, ACOs, insurers, and then, an additional breakout by entity type, to look at things like academic medical centers, health systems, critical access hospitals. So you'll be able to see that particular data, breakout within the annual report. All right, I'm about done with the presentation. I really only have one key takeaway after all of this, and certainly want to be able to take your questions. But I just want to tell everyone, continue to focus on active risk management, growing your security program. Most important, as you get the results of these assessments, digest them, work your risk management plans. So, and certainly be happy to take any questions that you may have, because there's a lot of data here, and look forward to the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I do have a first question here for you. I believe it was on the protect slide, but you mentioned access to personal email. Can you explain the issues? with that?
Yeah, sure. We're talking about access to personal email from a organizationally owned and managed device. Most folks, if they allow that because it's access to personal email, if you're not utilizing some level of enterprise DLP or doing SSL inspection or have the ability to block data from your organization, personal email is a great exfiltration point of data. It's also a great infiltration point from malicious links, things like that. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying if you do it, make sure you have the appropriate controls in place. And because those controls are actually very, very complex to make sure you get them right, what we see most organizations doing and starting to do is just blocking it from certain devices. They'll allow personal email, but they'll allow it, via some guest network or some other mechanism.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. The next question is, so we can see things are not getting better in terms of CSF conformance. Keep doing more things, but keep sliding back. How do we change that?
Well, what I believe is the most important part of this this equation, in my humble opinion, is organizations that they have to do assessments. So we certainly can come in and identify what those risks are. I cannot stress the importance of having a risk management and risk-focused approach to these assessments. So once you get those risks identified, make sure that it's a continual process, that you're able to look at, what are the goals of the security program? What are the goals of the business? How can I align what the security program and IT is doing to help support that business? By doing that, how can I get into the decision-making process to make sure that whatever risks are identified, that the organization can evaluate what those risks are and make good business decisions on whether they can mitigate that risk or they can accept that risk. Where I see successes and I see organizations that are leaping forward, very, very good relationships with and understanding from the IT speak up until the leadership and business speak. So the more conversation and the more governance and the more interaction that security has at the table, I think the better off you can be moving forward, and the better off once you make the commitment to move forward, that you can have the greatest success. Because ultimately this comes down to the organization has to make change. Some of the things that IT and security can do, they're going to do those things. But it also takes everybody in the organization to understand, adapt, and change culture and change process. So, it takes a top to bottom approach. So work it through active risk management, work it through as much engagement as you possibly can through your leadership. And we'd be happy to help you along that journey.
Thanks. I think you kind of were answering this a little bit in that previous answer, but the next question is, you mentioned that we focus on getting good scores when we should be focused on reducing risk. How do you explain that to leaders or the board? They just want to know, how do we compare with some facility down the street, as an example?
Yeah, no, it is in some cases, it is the necessary evil. I think where the success lies with the results of the assessment, once you have those results, if you can take those results, start to put together what you feel are your top priorities, and then can work those top priorities with your senior leadership, I think that's where you can have, shift some of that. Hey, when we talk to you, it's not going to be, did I get the 2.5 to the 2.8? The conversation can be, we're not addressing personal email with devices, and here's the risk. Oh, by the way, the likelihood of this occurring is quite high. Here's our plan moving forward, and here's the support we're asking you for. So, I think some of it is just making sure we can, we at Synergistic, we're starting to change our communication at the executive level, starting to de-emphasize the score. It's still there because it's how we give that common taxonomy, but we want to de-emphasize it as much as we can, and we really want to focus on here's where your risks are. Here's, if you address these risks, here's how you can make an impact. So.
All right. Next question is, are there any secrets, especially on the slide where you showed the organizations that had significant improvement? Are there any secrets to those organizations that had that? Did they have huge investment in technology, remediation, documentation, et cetera?
Yeah, no, excellent question. I don't want to say, I think the degree of huge can always be debatable. They did have a considerable investment in technology as proportional, in proportion related to their overall IT spend. IT spend had a big security spend on that, for that. So we did see that. We also saw the organization taking an active role in working their plan. So, understanding that while yes, you have to buy a technology, yes, you have to update documentation, you also have to make sure that the organization can adapt what all that means, can implement what you're doing, can make the necessary changes, and ultimately have minimal impact to the business. So a lot of that comes down to good engagement at the clinical leadership, good engagement, with the CIO, with the security teams. A lot of times what we see is, active roles with IT and security leaders, in bed with other business leaders, meeting and greeting, getting involved in their, day-to-day operations, understanding what the impacts to technology change as well as process change is going to mean for their business. So those are things that, we did see out of organizations. It was a top-down approach, and really good to see non-IT and non-security folks make a concerted effort for change. So.
Okay. Next question is, how big of an impact did COVID have, in your opinion, on this year's results? Which I know aren't necessarily within the report, but what have you seen so far this year?
No, that is a good question. I would say it's a little too early for any type of solid analysis. What I will tell you is that, say I've looked at a quarter of the assessments that we normally perform. I've looked at about a quarter of them and done some analysis. I'm still seeing the same themes out of those quarter. Now, if you ask specifically about timing of COVID, what we've noticed is a lot of our clients are moving their assessments into third and fourth quarter. We did not perform a lot of assessments. So, the data that's going to come out next year, I think, is going to provide very good insight into what the impacts of COVID had, because up until this point, most organizations haven't, we're just starting to get back into a, very normal and hectic routine of doing doing assessments now. So.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. I think we're out of time. So I want to remind everyone, please do go to the poll tab and complete that for this session. It does help for next year. We are going to take a 15-minute break. The one-on-one networking session is open. It's kind of a speed dating style session where you get 3 minutes with random people to get to know each other and create connections. So definitely take the time to join that. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next session here in 15 minutes. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, everybody.